Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. Let me tell you about two amazing sponsors who make this show possible. Let's talk first about Inbound. From marketing to sales and commerce to CX, Invoca's active conversation intelligence platform enables revenue teams to create better buying experiences, drive more leads, and increase revenue. Trusted by top brands like Dish Network, Mayo Clinic, Mutual of Omaha, and ADT, the Invoca team is doing some amazing work in turning conversational data into automated action to enhance digital touchpoints and human interaction. Now let's talk about Outbound. I hope that you'll take a look at Drips, the founders of conversational texting, where they use conversational AI to help you reach customers where they're most responsive, and that's on their phones. And working with major brands like 3-Day Blinds, Liberty Mutual, Credit Repair, and Gainsco, Drips is leading the way for some of the biggest brands in the world to improve engagement rates and outcomes for their prospects and customers. And now, back to the show. You would be hard-pressed to find a more significant story in U.S. history than race relations and how they've impacted what we've come up with in this American fabric. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a more significant location to study that or find a more impactful museum experience than the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King's words were significant then, just as they are today. But how do you market that message, especially where he was assassinated? How do you get out the word even more? How do you show the message with a need for history and a little faith? Faith Morris is the Chief Marketing Officer of the National Civil Rights Museum. And on this special episode, we'll discuss marketing where history is happening every day, how we got here, and how it impacts what we're seeing today and in the future. Dr. King's legacy, Black CMOs and diversity in the workplace, George Floyd, starting with understanding, the Freedom Awards, DE&I, trying to look at equity from the view of offense, Mandela, Rosa Parks, Carter, Clinton, the Dalai Lama, ribs and catfish, Graceland, and a lot more. So let's tune into Faith and Shark on this 300th episode of A Shark's Perspective. Faith, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. Tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Well, I am from Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm now back in Memphis after 25 years. I love it here. It was really interesting coming back home and seeing how much had and had not changed. I went to Memphis State University, so I stayed at home to go to school. My parents were just insistent on that because of some tragedy that happened in the family, and they did not want me to go too far. I majored in English, which really served me well. My parents were educators. Both of them have now passed. But I grew up with a book in my hand. I grew up writing and reciting poetry and loving literature and reading. And one of the things that my mom didn't realize the value of it then. I thought it was punishment. But I got to know Shakespeare better than anybody. She was about the only person I could talk to Shakespeare with because nobody I was hanging out with was trying to know anything about Shakespeare. But she also introduced me to Black literature and Black authors and Black poets. And so I got to know many of their names and familiar with their work and use their work as examples. I still do of that point of view, that perspective. I went from the university, it was Memphis State, honestly, when I was there. It's now University of Memphis. But majored in English, my professor, and they always told you, don't get into a professor's last name that was either an animal or color. Who thought if that made any difference, Well, my English Lit professor was Elizabeth White. Elizabeth White told me that Black girls had no business majoring in English. And I took that to my English teacher mama and asked her what she thought about that. And I also, reason this came up is because I had just gotten a D- on a paper with no marks on it. Now, one thing I knew I could do was write. Now, whether you believe the perspective that I have, but it certainly was not incorrect. But it had no instruction, it had no corrections, it had no anything. It was just that I had no business majoring in English. So we did take that to council at the school, and we took care of it. But it was just that mindset that kind of colored some things for me early on. Um, it's interesting, that I am now at the National Civil Rights Museum, and I've had a great um, career I went from college to media. I was a reporter, and then anchor, and then news director, and then public affairs director and promotions director. So all of those things. And I really found out that I really liked being behind the scenes and making things happen than being given stuff in my ear to tell me what to say. That wasn't cool for me. Went from that and decided that I really wanted to do my own thing. And I did. And so started a consultancy. And then that grew into an agency. Had fabulous clients. I also brought my parents, who were both in Memphis, to Chicago. I was in Chicago for 25 years. That's where I raised my family. And brought them both to, Chicago so I could take care of them. I was back and forth to Memphis. It was just not easy for me to keep a business going and keep doing that. And brought them to Chicago, and they lasted. Dad lasted a year, and Mom lasted 2 years. And Mom, interesting enough, was the sickest of the two. So anyway, after that, decided that I really wanted to take a little bit of a break, and got a call from Memphis to come and be involved in something that I had been involved in for a while. In fact, I had helped quite a bit, my dear friend Beverly, about coming to head up marketing.
You got this call from our mutual friend, Beverly?
Yes, we did. I did, and she wanted me to further position the museum globally. This was in 2013. 2014, the museum reopened after about 18 months of the biggest renovation that it had had in its history. And my job was to make sure folks knew what this little museum in Memphis was all about, how phenomenal it is, and how its role in telling the story of the civil rights movement is one of the most critical roles a museum can have, which is immersed in the truth and facts and hard history.
Well, and Beverly Robertson being the former president, who is now the brand ambassador to the world as the head of the Chamber of Commerce for Memphis, is a firecracker on her own. And she's done a lot with you to help advance it. So what's it like to market one of the top tourist attractions in the country, especially one in the National Civil Rights Museum that has such historical significance?
Well, make it no doubt that this museum was phenomenal before I got to it. And it had a rich history. It was one of the national sites of conscience, which very few museums in this world are part of. But it also needed to give people a deeper meaning of why this renovation happened and what was special about it and what story, was to be told, and to help folks understand that there was more to history than Dr. King, although he was the reason. His assassination is the reason that the museum exists in the first place. It's on a historic site. It's where history happened. But it's also a place where history is happening every day. And that's part of our story. It's the power of place. It is a place where people come from all over the world to understand better what happened during the historic movement. But it's really important for us to help folks understand that understanding history is an important thing for us to do. It's an important exercise. It's an important way to delve into how we got here. We need to take that and decide how it impacts what we're seeing now, because there is absolutely a new movement. When George Floyd was assassinated, murdered, in May of 2020, the country broke out in protests. Uh, Folks were feeling fearful and lost and mad as hell, and just not understanding how something like that could happen in front of an audience. It made no difference. The protesters, the activists, they started or ended their marches and protests at the museum. And it's because we have helped them understand that we are a place where, difficult conversations happen. We're a museum of protest. Every episode that's in the museum talks about protests and how it was. But it also talks about civil disobedience training, which is what SNCC and Dr. King, were all about, understanding how to train for protests, making it strategic. And last year, frankly, was really my first experience in any real deep way of them really going back to the historic movement to plan for today's movement. They pulled very heavily on it this time. And these were young people and diverse. One of the things we let you see when you come to the museum is that it wasn't a Black movement. It wasn't just Black people trying to save Black people, folks from all walks of life, every color in the rainbow, every persuasion and religion and culture were involved in it. And we're seeing that again.
Well, obviously, when you go to any museum, you hope to learn something. I mean, the National Civil Rights Museum is a powerful museum. I've seen it several times. It's a different experience, though. It's not like going to the Louvre and seeing beautiful artwork. I mean, there's just such a difference in a story. There's a real story behind it. It's an act that happened to a man from another who acted in hate from just across the street. It's something that's affected this country for hundreds of years and will affect it for years to come. But there's so much, for lack of a better phrase, that's history wrapped up in the museum. As the CMO, what do you want people to learn from a visit to the museum?
People come to the museum from all different persuasions. Some know about the civil rights movement. International visitors absolutely know about it. It's amazing how immersed they are in our history. Some of them have no idea about it. Some of them are mad about it. Some of them are not wanting to know anymore because they feel guilty and don't want to feel that guilt, don't want to feel that shame. You have history makers, those that were a part of the historic movement coming to visit. And those are really interesting times to walk through with them. And they say, oh, I knew when this happened, or I was there when that happened, or I was a child when it happened, or I marched with Dr. King all over the country. So there's so many different lessons you get. But I think the main thing is every exhibit, every episode that we talk about in the museum, there is a parallel to something today. We're still fighting for voting rights. We're still trying to get education equity. We're still trying to get fair housing. We're still trying to get fair health accommodations. We're still trying to get equity in our jobs, in our salaries. We're still trying to get gender equity. So I wish I could say that, everything is historic and we can just revel in history, but we can't. We have to understand that it is as appropriate today to understand what happened then, so that you can connect the dots on what you're seeing now. And then wonder, why in the world are we still going through the same thing? Why would we be in a nation that actually stormed the Capitol the way that happened January 6th? Well, if you understand your history, and if you see what we have seen over the past few years, it was coming. We had every reason to think that something like this might happen. We have to pay attention. I know you've heard of being woke. Well, if you don't get woke and stay woke, you're gonna miss it. It won't miss you though.
Yeah, I know one of the things that I thought was that's very impactful is seeing the Greyhound bus in the museum, the one that was burned during the firebombing, and you can walk through and see something like that and apply it to so many other different things. It's you don't feel just wrapped up in that one experience. There's so many different displays in there that you can look at and then apply to somewhere else that something happened in life. One of the things I wanted to ask too, because I think it's interesting, how did the National Civil Rights Museum and you handle the shutdown during COVID? Any good museum needs good donors and benefactors. And obviously, this has been a continuing change and evolution for the museum. It also happened when George Floyd was killed. You didn't have the opportunity quite the same way virtually, although there were protests in the streets, including in Memphis. The National Civil Rights Museum was closed at the time to visitors. And with COVID during that whole 16-month shutdown, I guess, or 17 months, whatever it's been, how did the museum react during such a tumultuous time?
So we closed March 2020. We opened July 2020. We closed again December 2020. We opened again March 2021. So we were closed for 6 months over a year's period. What we found during that time, and thankfully the museum is in good financial shape. A lot of museums are not in good financial shape. A lot of nonprofits, period, are not in good enough shape to not be in business every day.
Mm-hmm.
So, thankfully we are, but still you're working on not having income. What we did have though, during those 6 months, and actually it started especially after George Floyd, and because of the storytelling that we have had about the movement and those people that made the movement, and that folks have an obligation to make some kind of impact to make this world better. Folks were giving. Folks, we had just people started giving small gifts, big gifts, gifts. They wanted to help. They wanted to participate. They wanted to show that it's important for folks to understand where we came from, how we got here. What do we had for MLK 50, where do we go from here? We're still trying to figure that out. Where do we go from here? So we had a lot of benefactors that frankly had not been a part of our donor base before George Floyd, and those that were already supporters of the museum continued. We had, every year we do Freedom Award. And in 2020, we couldn't do Freedom Award. We couldn't do it because Freedom Award is a very social event, and no way you could have a socially distanced Freedom Award and have the same impact. We're going to figure it out this year because who knows what's going to happen in October this year. But we've got more options than we had then. But we had donors that gave to an event that didn't happen at the same level that they sponsored when it did. So the friends of the museum, new and old, really did show up. And it's because of that we continued our programming. We never stopped. The museum being closed has nothing to do with my department. My department works 7 days a week almost.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Lord have mercy. Yeah. When is the weekend? So the museum kept going. The King, April 4th, which is, King Day is our biggest. We have, 10 to 12,000 people, on our campus celebrating Dr. King's birthday. His birthday is the 15th, or whenever that official Monday is close to his birthday is when we celebrate. But April 4th is most significant for the museum because that's when he was assassinated. And 2020, we had to commemorate his assassination, and we did it virtually. And what virtual did, I always say that COVID is a blessing and a curse. The blessing has been that we were forced to come up with a way of keeping folks engaged and involved and commemorating things that we needed to not forget. And that was the beginning of our really phenomenal virtual program. I've been doing it virtually ever since. And we'll probably pivot to hybrid, once we're good with people coming back in big, audiences to the museum. So that's how we coped. That's how we survived during, really sketchy times, financial times.
You mentioned the Freedom Awards. What has that meant to you, and who are some of the recipients that have been part of that? I know there are small names that nobody's heard of, like Nelson Mandela and Joe Biden, small people like that. But talk about that amazing award ceremony and the kind of recipients. I mean, you've had Rosa Parks. I mean, just amazing names, every one of them.
So this is the 30th anniversary of the National Civil Rights Museum. It's the 30th anniversary of the Freedom Award. So when the museum opened on July 4th, 1991, the first thing that happened was to honor some folks that had been change makers 30 years ago. Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King, they were among the first recipients. We have honored folks that people had never heard their names before. And when they heard their stories, they were like, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? And then there were names that you had to have. C.T. Vivian, Benjamin Crump, Brian Stevenson, Ava DuVernay, Jesse Jackson. Presidents Carter and Clinton. I mean, the list goes on, and I can't tell you that it's male or female dominated. It's about half and half. We've honored the Dalai Lama and Robert Parrish Moses, who we just lost. And one of the things about the Freedom Award and the whole intention of it is to honor men and women who have contributed greatly, to civil and human rights, who have risked their lives in many instances, who have made it, their life's work to do good, to make this a better place for those that are disenfranchised. So pretty much anybody you can imagine that has done anything that's critical and the work goes on and honors go on. We've really tried to make sure that we honor them with the Freedom Award.
The shared community and history that we have in Memphis, I think, is different than what you would have in Chicago or Phoenix or LA or New York. And there's a different experience, I think, that people here get as being a part of Memphis in a very integrated community versus a lot of communities that are not very integrated.
Memphis is majority Black. Here's the thing. Memphis, it's been over 50 years that Dr. King was assassinated here. And Memphis has been in mourning since his death. Has not gotten past the assassination, has not been able to lift itself past it. When we did MLK 50 in 2018, it was an opportunity for Memphis to not be the reason, that the only story we tell is that Dr. King was assassinated here, but that we've taken what he meant to this city and why he came here in the first place, which was for the sanitation workers, and see what has happened for them since then. So that this new story for Memphis can be one to be more proud of, instead of it only being reflective of what the most sad story is. And so that did happen. Well, we're finding that even though Dr. King was assassinated here, Dr. King spent his last moments here, Dr. King had visited before, Dr. King was all over this country. We have folks in cities all over the world that shout his name out. at different points of time based on what's going on in their world. Um, we have little kids that come that have no idea about him other than what they were told, what they've read, what they've seen. They didn't live through what Dr. King was about. I was a child when Dr. King was assassinated. I didn't know anything about Dr. King. So what's so amazing about him is that it's as if he's still here. He is the most well-read. Everybody knows some quote. Everybody has either seen a book or heard a speech or all the films about him or those that were inspired by him. So it's hard to get away from him, and he's been gone this long. So Memphis has a special place for Dr. King in the way we want to remember him, not just because he died, but because he lived. And that's why it's so important for us to celebrate his birthday. That's why it's important for us to celebrate his assassination, but use that as the model for how we do better and not repeat those acts. When young people come to the museum on a Friday night, on date night, and want to be close to what this interpretation is, what this storytelling is, that tells you that something's going on. And so Dr. King really has made an impact on babies, on the lives of so many different generations. And I don't see that there's any end to that any closer. I mean, there's nothing that shows me that that's going to let up at all.
One of the things that has grown in importance, obviously, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that, especially with race, has had a major importance as we grow in diversity, including in our workforce. I'm curious, I know that you obviously have a pretty large community in your network, but I was trying to think prior to this, how many other Black chief marketing officers that I know, or maybe that you know, even in this community. I have worked with brands all over the country, and I am heartened to see more people of color, of all kinds of races, show a larger predominance in the workforce. We still have a lot of ways to go, but including in C-level roles, you still don't see very many of them.
Well, let's start with this statistic. Only 5% of Black executives are in the C-suite. That's a whole lot of work to do. There's a whole lot that needs to be done to fix that. One of the things that the museum is involved in is to look at that. And so we'll be revealing something about that soon. But what we know is equity is, there was this thing about equality, right? That's what Dr. King was fighting for, was equality. He just wanted to make sure that you got invited. He wanted to make sure that if there was a school and it was decent, that you got there. He wanted the doors to be open, because he went from them being closed to trying to open them. We had to go past that to, there's this image, and I think I might have given you this image before, but there's this image of this family standing trying to look at a baseball game over a fence, and there's a mom, there's a dad, and there's a kid. The dad is standing there, he needs no box. The mom is on a box, and the kid is on a box. So actually there are 3 boxes. I take that back. The dad's on a box, the kid's on a box, the mom's on a box. Well, the dad is looking over the fence pretty easily. He really didn't need a box. The mom actually could use his box, because she's just barely seeing over, and the kid is looking at the fence. He can't see over the fence at all. And so until we have all the boxes that we need to see over the fence, we have no equity. Just because we're at the fence doesn't mean that we're getting what we need to get. My daughter reminds me all the time, and of course I didn't originate this, I just used it as my mantra. If you don't have a seat at the table, bring a seat. Now I say bring the table, because you just can't be stopped. And so it's important for those in power to understand that something has to be done. Minds have to be changed. We have to stop worrying about what you lose if you give. There has been so much damage done. There's been so much inferior thought given to what is the best decision to make, even on behalf of the corporation, on behalf of the entity, on who is the best candidate. So if the only folks you know look like you, the chances are you won't find out who the best candidate is. All you know is who your candidates are, who your circle is. There's some mighty amazing people outside that ring that you hang out in.
Yeah, amen to that.
And if you haven't invited somebody to your house, if you've never had anybody Black to dinner, then you don't know Black.
Well, Faith, this is going to be the most non-obvious twist on questions, but it's something I ask everybody who's been on the show.
Okay.
What is your favorite kind of shark and why? Or do you have a shark
Okay,
story of any
you're
kind?
not gonna ask me what kind of sharks.
There's not a lot of sharks. You probably see more catfish anywhere around here than sharks.
Catfish I see is on a plate. I don't see them either. Oh my God.
All right. Well, fair enough. And
I think it's amazing that you swim with sharks. I see where you get your name. You are brave and you have nerve.
part of that is the perspective I also bring from swimming with them and perspective as a scuba diver. I look at things from as many points of view to inform me as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Faith, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Oh my goodness. Have we not had those already?
No, these are fun to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
All right. Number 1. So you're bringing friends to Memphis and you only have one choice of where to take them because of a limited amount of time. And obviously that's after they've been to the National Civil Rights Museum. You're going to take them to either Elvis Presley's Graceland or Beale Street. And I'll even add it as BB King's on Beale Street.
Well, I'd say probably Beale Street, although Elvis Presley's place is a place that folks really love to go.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, it's totally different experience, but it is an experience you will not forget. All right, number 2. So you spent a lot of time there. Chicago or Memphis?
Oh, wow. Are you going to ask me that? From somebody who spends a lot of time still in Chicago, just got back from Chicago, will be going back in a few weeks. You know, that's a hard one because I entertain people in both places. Folks follow me back to Chicago.
You got to pick your favorite child. And look, at least you got COVID in Chicago. So
no, I did not. I got COVID here.
Oh, okay. So pick your favorite child. Is it Chicago or Memphis?
Oh my God, that's such a political question.
Yes. And the political answer is the obvious one, considering where you are and where you attract people to.
Well, I'm going to say Memphis because Chicago doesn't need help.
All right. Number 3. If you were going to another MLK exhibit to really get a good experience when you were doing your travels and you had a choice of one, would you go to the MLK Junior National Historic Park in Atlanta or the MLK Junior Memorial in Washington, D.C.?
You know what? You are so wrong for all of these questions because I have strong links with both of them as well. And different reasons for sending people to both. And I'm going to say it this way. If you want to understand how Dr. King lived and his heritage, that still is there, the authentic place, that's in Atlanta. If you want to see the history around Dr. King's life, that's in DC.
That's a very good, I'll give you that one. That was a very good skirt on which way to go. All right, number 4. So we talked about this briefly before. Catfish or barbecue?
Catfish. Oh, wait, hold on.
Barbecue pork. You're in the barbecue pork capital of the world.
Okay, but I love ribs. Yeah. That's my thing. I love ribs, so I'm going to always say barbecue.
Okay, all right. Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today. is biscuits or cornbread?
Good cornbread. Sweet.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I expected someone in the South to say biscuits because of gravy and everything
Yeah,
else.
biscuits everywhere, but you don't have good cornbread.
Cornbread goes well with barbecue ribs.
Oh my God. I don't eat biscuits with cornbread, with
Exactly.
barbecue ribs, that's for sure.
So Faith, where can people find out more about you, more about the National Civil Rights Museum, and more?
Go to civilrightsmuseum.org and hopefully you'll come visit civilrightsmuseum.org. And I am on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, as is the museum. So hang out with us.
Absolutely. Faith, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for being with us today on the 300th episode of A Shark's Perspective.
300, that's hot.
It is indeed. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
So there was my conversation with Faith Morris, the Chief Marketing Officer of the National Civil Rights Museum. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, I've always enjoyed museums of all kinds. In fact, I just got back from one of the Smithsonian museums in DC that even had a shark exhibit. But it's nothing like the experience you get when walking through the National Civil Rights Museum. I encourage you all to go at least once. Faith and team do a masterful job of helping tell the story. Doesn't matter what color you are. Dr. King changed the world, and the museum is just the start to where your eyes will open even more and change can start to happen. It's a shared history in Memphis where he was assassinated, but a birthplace as well for new understandings. A special thank you to Faith for having that conversation with me, even as I fumble through most of it. Second, we have a long way to go in the workplace. As she discussed, there isn't nearly enough diversity in the C-suite. Only 5% of Black executives are in the C-suite. I often talk about even just the lack of diversity of thought with teams and brands and agencies, let alone race. Bringing people from other backgrounds together with their unique experiences, especially when those backgrounds are very diverse, can really help move things forward in society, and we need more of it. As she said, there's a whole lot of work to do. Third, I will simply quote a portion of Dr. King's famous speech from 1963 at the Lincoln Memorial. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I say amen to that, and I hope that we can continue to have real conversations with each other without tearing each other down. And a rare fourth, as I said at the time of the 100th show, the 200th, and now the 300th, please know that I am honored that people take the time to be a part of this show. I've been so lucky to have thoughtful discussions with some of the smartest and most influential people in business today from a lot of diverse backgrounds. I hope to continue to earn your respect and trust, which matters far more to me than being in a spotlight, likes, shares, followers, or any of that. This show has not been about anything other than trying to help people to do better with their brands, educate and help businesses grow. And every once in a while, I get to talk about my weird passion for swimming with some of my fishy friends. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I'm so thankful to everyone who listens. Thank you to the amazing sponsors of Evoke Endreps. Would you please consider writing a review and letting me know your thoughts on the show? I read all of them, and it helps me create better content for both of us. I'm pretty certain that I have at least another 300 episodes in me. Sharks live forever, or at least this one will. Keep swimming, and please join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.